Welcome to America Reads Fun and Easy Learning Activities, where college students work together to create these activities. The subjects that we cover include reading, writing, and math. In today's activity, we will be doing some math and learning how to use the correct equations to find the volumes of spheres, cones, and cylinders. And I, Viridiana Rodriguez, will be walking you through this fun activity. So in today's activity, we're going to be going over how to find the volume for spheres, cones, and cylinders. So we can see that they all use a different equation to find the volume. And we can see, for example, in these two, something that they have similar is that they both use pi and they both need a value for a radius. Now for the sphere though, we don't need a value for height, but for cone, we do need a value for height, which is the h here. And now for cylinder, we also need a value for radius and height. So the equations used to find the volume for cone and cylinders are pretty similar, just in the fact that they both need values for the height and the radius, as you can see here. So I'll be going over some examples. Also, something else that we need to keep in mind when looking through these equations is that the radius, the r stands for radius, and the h stands for height. So the radius is looked at from the middle of the cone or the middle of the cylinder. So you can see here it's at the top, you can see the dot is in the middle. So it's the measurement from the end to the middle of the shape that we're looking at. And it's easier to look at the radius when we're actually looking at a sphere, because we're looking at a circle here. So you can see that the dot is in the middle of the circle and it's measuring all the way up to the end. So that would be the radius, is the measurement from the middle all the way to the outer side of the shape that we're looking at. So now we're gonna go over some examples, and I'm gonna put my equations here to the side, where we're actually gonna go back to look at those so that we do not forget our equations, because we are gonna have to look at those. So now for our first example here, we have to find the volume of this sphere, and I have my equation here, and I also have a helpful calculator to the side, just because the equation used to find the volume of a sphere has a fraction in it, and I don't really like fractions. So to start off, I'm gonna actually just copy down my equation so that it's much easier for me and I don't actually have to look back to this here. So I'm gonna copy it down. Volume equals 4/3 pi radius cubed. So now we actually are only missing one value here, right? Which is the r, which is our radius. Now this sphere has a radius of 7. So then what we do is we go ahead and plug in the 7 into our equation. So volume equals 4/3 times pi times 7 cubed. So now I can actually go ahead and plug that into my calculator. Also, because since we have pi here, pi obviously represents a big number. So most of the time it's easier just to use a calculator instead of doing the whole math for the value that pi represents. So after I have plugged that into my calculator, you can see that the answer that we get is 1,436.7, and we can round, so that would be a 0.8. So 1,436.8 cents we rounded. And we're not given any units, which means that our answer does not include any units also. So the volume for this sphere with a radius of 7 would be 1,436.8. Now for our second example here, we are going to be finding the volume for this cone, right? So here I have my equation to find the volume of a cone. And I'm again gonna go ahead and copy it down here just so that it's easier for me and I do not have to keep looking back to my little flashcard. So the equation that we use to find the volume of a cone is volume equals pi times r squared times h over 3. Again, h stands for height and r stands for radius. Comparing this equation to the equation used to find the volume of a sphere, the equation used for a sphere, we only have one value, which is radius, that we need to plug in. This equation, we have two values that we need to plug in, right? We need to plug in our value for radius and we need to plug in the value for height. So height is 6 and our radius is 2. So our equation after plugging in our values would look like this. Pi times 2 squared times 6 over 3. Now that we have plugged in our values, now we can actually go in and solve the equation. And again, I'm gonna actually just go ahead and plug this into my calculator just because it's much easier for me. And again, we're dealing with fractions, so it's a little bit harder to solve that. So after we plug it into our calculator and plug in our values, the answer that we get is 25.1. And our second number is a 3, which means that we would not round. Therefore, the volume of a cone that has a height of 6 and a radius of 2 would be equal to 25.1. Now for our next example, we are finding the volume of a cylinder that has a radius of 3 and a height of 6. So here I have my equation for a cylinder, and I'm gonna, again, copy the equation down so that I don't have to keep looking back to my little flashcard. So it would be pi times r squared times height. So now we plug in our values. 6 is the value for our height and 3 is the value for our radius. So after plugging in our values, our equation would look like pi times 3 squared times 6. And we're going to actually go ahead and put that in parentheses just so that we don't get a little bit confused, because I know that when we put numbers like that together, it could be really easy to confuse our numbers and then we mix our math up. So again, here I have my calculator. I'm going to go ahead and plug it into my calculator, which gives me the total of 169.6. So for a cylinder that has a height of 6 and a radius of 3, we would get a volume of 169.6. Thank you for joining me on this fun activity. Be sure to like and subscribe to America Reads YouTube channel for more lessons just like this one. See you in our next video.